Hello everyone. This talk will be a summary of the ongoing Carmarthenshire Bogs Project with some background to peat bogs, and will illustrate some of the achievements of the project over the years. The project would likely not have taken place without the presence of a biodiversity partnership in the county. These are now called nature partnerships. For over 20 years, conservation organisations and local experts have been coming together regularly in the county and are a local knowledge hub and forum for sharing ideas and expertise. And over the years, it's projects such as these that have come out of conversations and opportunities that arise at these meetings. But this specific project arose when one of NRW's lower plant experts raised the issue of the importance of some local bog sites. These were identified within a priority wetland area in Wales and also on common land with no known ownership. And this means that the council, who I work for, has responsibilities in some form for their safeguard. So this provided an opportunity to work with others to look at these sites, to look at their restoration history and raising their profile. But to set the scene about peatlands, let's look at their context within Wales and how they're formed. And here you can see a summary of peatlands in Wales and specifically lowland raised bogs in Carmarthenshire. So basically, peat is a type of soil that forms as a result of an accumulation of the remains of partly decayed organic material, mostly from plants. Peatlands are waterlogged, carbon-storing landscapes made up of peat and are estimated to cover in Wales over 90,000 hectares, approximately 4.3% of our total land area. And you can see that over 4,000 is lowland raised bog. So a survey of the peat resource was undertaken in Wales, and in Carmarthenshire there are 10 lowland raised bog sites covering 147 hectares, and that's as compared to blanket bog, which you can see is much in the majority, and that you tend to find in upland areas. And these include 2 of the sites in the Carmarthenshire Bogs Project, which I will focus on in this talk. Importantly, although I can see it's hidden behind my face here, the graph shows the decline of bog habitats since 1840. So lowland raised bogs have formed in the lowlands on wet floodplains or in areas which were historically areas of standing water such as a lake or hollow, and where they've been infilled. Cors Caron in Tregaron and Cors Fochno near Aberystwyth are the best examples of these in Wales. And in Carmarthenshire, our lowland raised bogs tended to form in hollows created by retreating glaciers. So glacial lakes formed first, slowly filling with clay and silt from debris washed in from the surrounding barren landscape after the glacier had retreated. And then as plants colonised the areas, a muddy layer formed on the top. And then finally, as the site was colonised by bog-forming plants, peat eventually formed over many thousands of years. The important thing to note is that peat bogs receive all their water from precipitation rather than from streams or springs, and this means that they're nutrient poor and acidic habitats. And undisturbed peat bog vegetation is generally dominated by a few groups of plants such as sphagnum mosses and cotton grasses, and these have adapted to grow in nutrient poor situations. So in Carmarthenshire, which you can see outlined in blue here, all the bog sites are along a ridge above the Towie Valley, and are there the blue hatch sites marked out with a red line. And they started forming after the last ice age, when, as I said, retreating ice created hollows in the landscape. And peat depth surveys that we undertook highlighted 2 sites in particular, here shown with arrows: Pyllau Cosion in the west and Vigin Common in the northeast. And here we have Vigin Common, and the bog makes up the darker area within the site in the northeast. It is the deepest bog in the project and has over 10 metres of peat. And this site, as you can see from the aerial photograph, evidences some of the impacts of peatlands over the years that have contributed to their decline. It's surrounded by forestry, and much of Wales' bog sites have been afforested over the years, and a large ditch was excavated to try and drain the site some years ago. And there's evidence that the peat was cut on this site at some point in the past, and the peat is now slumping towards the large ditch that was excavated. And there's also scrub encroachment, conifer trees and willow scrub, but it should be noted that the willow scrub is excellent for migratory warblers such as grasshopper warbler, which has been recorded up here. And this common does have graziers, but was not fenced all the way around, so that the one active grazier couldn't get animals on to graze it effectively, and so now areas have become very dominated by millennia, and it had suffered from burning in the past. And this is a smaller site, Archaeological, but with an area of deep peat within it, and significantly for the project it had very good public access. But they had similar issues to Fig in that a small ditch had been cut within it in the past to help drain it. And here specifically arson is an ongoing issue, and attempts to burn it have taken place almost annually for some years. And it's interesting for this site because it has no grazing rights registered on it. So there should be no interest in managing, if you want to call it that, this site in any way. But we have worked with the local fire service and police and carried out local visits to properties because we didn't seem to find a mechanism through writing letters and just during local talks to prevent this fires taking place. But this year I'm happy to say that the site was not burnt, but it does seem to evidence one local attitude towards these sites, which again can be seen as sort of trash land. There was a significant issue of fly tipping here, and we had to pay thousands and thousands of pounds to specialist contractors to remove asbestos contaminated fly tipping. So we did spend rather a lot of money we would have liked to have spent on management removing fly tipping. And we've also worked to eradicate an area of Japanese knotweed. But I think what stands out here is that you can see from the aerial photograph that the land is surrounded by improved agriculture and really represents a tiny time capsule of environmental history within the landscape. So the previous few slides are focused on human issues, but we mustn't forget how important these sites are for wildlife, and this slide shows some of the rich diversity of species that have been recorded on these sites. We've got hen harriers, curlews, hares, small pearl bordered fritillary butterfly, green hair streak, and then the important plants that grow on bogs, the sphagnum mosses, the carnivorous sundew plants, and hidden behind me there cranberries. And the bog habitats support plants that are adapted to waterlogged, acidic and nutrient poor conditions, so very specific. And these plants, specifically the sphagnum and the cotton grass, play a vital role in the creation of peat. Where the water table is high and stable, dead plants don't fully decompose, and the low levels of dissolved oxygen in the water means that the decay is inhibited, allowing decomposed plant materials to accumulate, and this forms peat. And the peatlands also provide important nesting and feeding grounds for many birds. And as I said, golden plover, curlew, nightjar, short-eared owl, hen harrier and great grey shrike have all been recorded on Viggin Common. We had a very active bird recorder up there who recorded many of these species, so we can see how valuable they are. And of course the sites are good for us, we mustn't forget that. This unfortunately is not universally felt, and still some local people see them as dangerous sites, but everyone you can see on that slide survived their visit, I can assure you. Almost every site has a tale from local people of machinery or animals being lost within it. And one local community council had one of the bogs fenced off with danger signs erected some years ago, and this mentality, you know, has been quite hard to reverse during the project. But we have worked hard to change this perspective and worked with tourism providers and schools, taking them to the bogs for walks and activities, and you'll see some slides later on with activities on the bogs. But one of the best aspects to the project has been establishing links with Swansea University. Their input has added an immense amount to the project, and they have ongoing involvement through 2 PhDs which are carrying out studies on the sites. So peat soils accumulate around 1 millimetre or so every year. So 1 metre of peat can take, you know, up to 1,000 years to form, and as a result many of Wales's areas of peatlands have been accumulating in these small increments for as much as 9,000 years or more. So, you know, peat formation preserves a wide range of remains within the peat, including tiny pollen grains from the surrounding environment, charcoal as evidence of previous burning, and even dust from volcanic eruptions taking place thousands of miles away. So studying these remains provides an important means to understand the evolution of the Welsh landscape and the effect of past variations in climate. And here in this slide you can see Emily and Shuan from Swansea are taking a peat core which was examined at the university, and the pollen record was methodically recorded and carbon dated carried out along the core. And here we can see the results of the peat core from Pwllheli. I hope you can see that. I can see that it's quite small, but hopefully you can pick out the detail. On the left hand side we can see a photograph of the core itself. So if you work up from the bottom, it's got the silty clay layer which is quite deep, which formed in the cold lake deposits at the bottom, and then above that there's a narrower layer of lake mud, and then at the top over 5 meters of peat which developed over thousands of years. And carbon dating of woody remains showed that the peat started forming approximately 9,700 years ago before present. And the green line shows the accumulation of organic matter over time. So you can see during the coldest layer, when it was a barren cold water lake, there was very little organic matter, but that as the lake developed, it sharply rose, and then that is maintained as the peat formed. And there are also photographs of larger objects found in the core. So if you start at the bottom, you can see there was a photograph of a small stone that was washed into the post-glacial lake, pollen grains which were identified of birch and oak, and then preserved heather, and then finally on top a small fragment of charcoal. And all this information has allowed a picture to develop of a changing landscape over thousands of years, and we worked with a local artist to create illustrations of how the local landscape at one of the bogs would have looked over time. And here you can see them in the slide, from the post-glacial lake, looking at the fen layer between 9,000 and 6,000 years before present, and then finally a schematic illustration of how the bog looks today. And these have been very useful in when we, give talks to give some impression of how our landscape developed over time. But one of the main bits of management that we've tried to undertake, and one of the big issues, is the blocking off of ditches within the bogs. And there are a number of methods to do this, and we seem to have tried them all. But fortunately we've worked with experienced contractors who've been used to working on bogs, who've undertaken the work. But this sequence of photographs shows the positive impact of blocking the deep cut ditch that was draining water from Viggin Bog. So obviously we want to keep the bogs wet. Sphagnum mosses, which are the building blocks of many peatlands, can hold up to 20 times their weight in water. So by retaining water in the bog, it slows the flow out from the bog into the surrounding landscape, and does help in some areas to prevent the risk of flooding downstream. And here it's clear to see that over a fairly short period of time, the first photograph is February 2016, going up to May 2018, that blocking this ditch was a success. First of all, the ditch filled with water, and we stopped hearing the water trickling into the ditch from the surrounding bog. And then sphagnum and cotton grass soon filled up in the ditch, aiding peat formation rather than losing it quickly from the bog. And this has continued to happen. So, you know, that's been something that we've shown to be very successful. But also on Viggin, because, as I said before, peat had been cut in the bog, it was slumping towards this main ditch. So we worked with local contractors to create peat buns within the ditch, peat buns within the bog, parallel to the main ditch, to stop the water seeping down through the ditch within the slumped area. And these are helping to retain water now in the centre of the bog. And you can see behind the dam in the top left hand corner how the water has been retained. It's not passing through that new peat bund that we created. And finally, on the ditch front, we put in some blocks using plastic piling, which you can see in the bottom left hand corner here. This is on a smaller, older ditch. A small tracked machine pushed the interlocking sheets into the ground, and the ground did rather disconcertingly wobble as the machine moved over the bog. And we were for once rather glad of the thick layer of millinnia and that we were working on. Certainly the machine driver was grateful for it. And in addition, we've cut fire breaks on a number of the bogs to help mitigate the potential damage from any arson event. And you can see this in the bottom right hand corner here. And these have had an added benefit of considerably helping access by providing good ground to walk on, and has hopefully encouraged a few more visits by people. They do kind of form nice circular walks on the bogs. And finally, and this was completed just before lockdown, you can see in the top right hand corner on Viggin, we applied for permission to fence off the common land from Welsh Government, and we fenced two remaining strips of land that had been open before, and this has allowed the local grazier to get animals back onto the common. And we hope that this will work well and continue to liaise with the grazier to monitor the success of this. And as I said, public engagement has been really important. We have a website and there are information panels on or near some of the bog sites, but nothing is better than getting people onto the bogs themselves. And even on an extremely foggy day shown here, the experience is special and very atmospheric. In fact, the fog encouraged the people to take a closer look at the habitat at their feet. Although the fog was so bad at one point, there was some debate as to the correct route off the site. We really couldn't see much more further than about 20 metres or so. But here we've got Siwan Davis from Swansea University talking to the visitors about the peat bog. And here we have somebody trying out ground penetrating radar, which was used to record the depth of the bog. And here we have some of the younger visitors helping to take a peat core. And when they did this, they got down to the lovely grey clay layer, which would have been at the bottom of the bog and formed during the post-glacial period. and this grey clay was soon smothered all over their hands. But I hadn't thought to include potential allergy to 10,000-year-old clay deposits in my risk assessment, but to my relief it didn't seem to have any adverse impact and only soothing effects, so I was grateful for that. But they certainly enjoyed smothering it all over themselves. And local schools have enjoyed the opportunity to visit the sites as well, and here we have pupils from schools just down the valley taking full advantage of some free time to explore another of the bogs that was in the project, Mynydd Bach. And this site, as you can see, has been useful in talking about climate change, because as we all know, green plants absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, and the absorbed carbon when a plant dies is normally released back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide as the plants rot. But on peatlands, as the plants don't fully decompose due to the wet conditions, the carbon that was fixed into the plant tissue isn't released back into the atmosphere. So peatlands lock away more carbon than forests and woodlands and have the potential to sequester or soak up carbon in perpetuity as long as they're in good condition, acting as a global carbon store of significant importance, and every bog in Wales can contribute to that. But here the wind farm in the distance provided a good topic of conversation to discuss how we're dealing with climate change now and looking for low carbon solutions to energy provision and how important our peatlands are. So to finish off today, the project has no specific project funding, and we're always looking for opportunities to carry on with management and engage with local people. Most recently, we have created 2 cycle routes that link up most of the commons in 2 big circular cycle routes, and you can see this here. We've got a link to the national peatlands projects in Wales, and that's been really useful because they've provided us with good advice and funding, and we'll always look for opportunities to learn from the work that they're undertaking on other sites. And it's been really good to work with such an interesting range of partners. We've worked with Swansea University, the National Botanic Gardens of Wales, Dyfed Archaeological Trust, schools, local contractors, the local grazier and Natural Resources Wales. And we've received funding from a range of sources from Welsh Government, the National Peatlands Projects, NRW and the Heritage Lottery Fund. But to finish off, as with so much conservation work today, you undertake it not necessarily because it's easy, but because it is hard, but the benefits are significant. We've learnt to be adaptable and jump on funding opportunities when they've arisen, and perhaps most importantly to kind of carry on regardless, and the project's ongoing, and hopefully we'll be able to undertake future management, but certainly continue to raise awareness about these important sites. So thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.